Hi, yeah, thank you. I've been following along with the comments in the chat box and tried to kind of pull together some of the different questions um, that cropped up and link some of the things together. And I thought maybe a nice place to start would be um, around the design of the bicycles themselves. And the way that we talked about how there are different perceptions of the previous of the mobike bikes that we used, from sort of slow and steady equaling safe versus sort of sluggish and feeling dangerous, but also kind of issues about different heights of cyclists, as well as maybe also different styles of bike. So Jimmy, you mentioned uh, uh, e-bikes and sort of traditional bikes as part of those, but we had some comments about the possibility of tricycles, and I wondered whether there are design lessons that we've learnt from the Mobike experience, but also the way that design might help us to overcome some of the capability issues that our Salford and UCAN group raised as well. So maybe both uh, presentations might have some thoughts on how design interacts with those capabilities and how we might have learnt some design issues. Um, Perhaps if I go to someone from the Salford group first, if anyone wanted to speak to that.
Yes, sorry, just turning the microphone on. Yeah, that follows on from Luke's section. If Luke wanted to add anything, I think it's really important that we think about the kind of diversity of the bikes available, and it's definitely a challenge as well for a bike share provider.
Yes. Let me just follow on from what Graham said as well. Yeah, absolutely. It's challenging. I think the Mobike scheme, being sort of generation one of the bikes, was a real eye opener to the diversity of cyclists and sort of cycling experiences that there are in the city. And I think it's a very valuable experience. Whether or not we define it as a successful scheme, I think it was a very valuable scheme in that sense, that it taught us a lot about what bike share schemes can potentially offer and look like. And yeah, I think going forward, there definitely needs to be a diversity on offer, and not necessarily just in terms of gears available and frame size and things like that, but also, as Nick touched on earlier, sort of e-bikes as well, as we move toward the future and looking at how we can make the cycling experience as accessible and pleasant as possible.
Yeah, maybe then if kind of not wanting to put Jimmy on the spot and recognizing that you're early in some respects in still understanding this, and you've got a provider to a point, but you mentioned some different types of bike that you might be thinking of. I don't know if trikes have featured in your thinking, but it seems like that might be an option, but obviously that maybe creates new issues in terms of the infrastructure we have and whether or not it's suitable for that sort of bike. But I do wonder if there's also a thing about the way that any bike hire scheme might fit with these other micro or active mobility options that we're starting to discover, like scooters, like trikes, like e-bikes, and whether that's the way you see it going, as kind of a more holistic, with different options that suit different users maybe as well.
Yeah, so I guess in our approach we're taking at the moment, very much trying not to be too specific about like design of bikes, for example. We're not trying to say it must be X, it must be Y. We do kind of trust the industry to provide bikes that will suit a broad range of users, because that's their business, really, isn't it? Is to provide stuff that will appeal to a broad cross section. But and we're also, I think the way that we try to set up the contract is that hopefully we're not just going to buy a specific solution. We're leaving it open for the providers to be innovative. So, like say, with the different kinds of micro mobility or e-cargo bikes, we're leaving it open in the contract. So if the provider, or we ask the providers to be a bit more innovative to provide a solution to a specific problem, they can do it through that. So one of the things we are doing is to try and use Como UK guidance to kind of as a a principle for what is a good bike hire scheme. So we're not trying to define that. We're leaving that to the industry body, which we found really useful. They've been really good in supporting us on that. So yeah, not that we haven't thought about this, and we do recognise that there's a whole wide range of stuff, and we do want to address specific problems, but we don't want to constrain the potential bidders in the way that we frame the ITT, frame the request, the bike hire scheme, if that makes sense.
Yes, thanks. I guess one of the other areas that came up quite a lot in the chat was about the subscription model and the payment method, and whether that creates a new barrier. And I wondered if maybe we could try and talk a bit more and explain how that might solve or complicate and connect to some of these capability factors that actually get in the way of people taking up making use of these sorts of schemes. Does that translate in terms of the type of subscription model or the payment methods available, and how that might solve and maybe introduce capabilities? Perhaps someone from the Salford team might like to, or indeed UCLan, to reach up into Lancashire.
Yeah, well, I'll pick up on that, just to start with. I think if part of the intention of a scheme is to be more equitable and to be more inclusive and to encourage people that don't have either access to a bike, whether because they can't afford it or whether they don't have storage space at home, or for a variety of reasons aren't able to use it, then understanding digital inclusion is really, really important. And if a scheme relies on an app, that relies on a smartphone, that relies on having a credit card or debit card, then there is a proportion of people in society that will be excluded because of that. So if there was a system that was more flexible in terms of how payment could be made, how bikes can be found, how understanding the boundaries of the mapping of where the bike can be taken can be accessed, then that makes it more inclusive. And it's about social policies and transport policies, which fits into what I was talking about social conversion factors that will enable those things to be developed more coherently and more inclusively.